Welcome everyone. My clock just hit 10:30 here in Chicago, and so it is a pleasure to say hi and to bring you into our Leading for Good conference. I realize there were more than 300 of you this morning for our opening session, and so many of you may have already seen some of this, but I know that people are also over these 3 weeks just coming into moments of the conference, and so we want to just share a little context in each of these sessions. Where we are in the conference is we are right in the middle. We have had big idea power chats that have powered us to date on how we thrive at the intersection of profit and purpose. Today, we are going into our main conference where we're exploring issues in depth with panels like this one. And then starting next week, for those of you who are inspired and say, you know what, I want to focus even more of my career at this intersection, we have coffees where you can learn how to make that pivot. Just to share the on-demand content that is in the vFairs platform, we have a lot from our first 2 weeks of Big Idea Chats. We have a power chat with Michael McCaffey, who's the president and CEO of PolicyLinks on advancing corporate racial equity. We have our power chat with Rashad Tabakawala, who's the author of Restoring the Soul of Business. We have our power chat with Xavier Ramey on 1 year after George Floyd, Where Does Business Stand? We have our power chat with Diana Aviv, the former CEO of both Feeding America and Independent Sector on leading for social impact. We have our power chat with Renetta McCann on delivering for inclusion based on her role as the CIEO, Chief Inclusion Experience Officer at the Publicis Group. We have our power chat with Tonise Paul, who is the chairman of Energy BBDO on how to lead with meaning in business. And we want to also thank our incredible sponsors, the lead sponsor of this conference, Comcast, for powering us in all of our endeavors and being a strategic partner more broadly. We want to thank our, there we go, it's moving forward, platinum sponsors, ITW and William Blair. You'll notice we have a lot of these incredible team members in this virtual room. We want to thank our gold sponsor, Fifth Third. We want to thank our silver sponsors, Mondelēz and Wintrust, and we want to thank our bronze sponsors, Mesero and Packed with Purpose. And this content is going to be brought to a broader audience by our media sponsor, Better. And so with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to the actual conversation that you came for, envisioning and executing big corporate commitments. And as you can see on the very left, the smiling Laura Coy. She is still smiling this morning because that is her way. She is the Director of Philanthropy Strategy at William Blair and Company, where she is responsible for overseeing the William Blair Foundation, creating the firm's integrated social investment strategy, and developing volunteer opportunities for employees to serve as leaders in the local community. She is also a Baumhart ambassador and leader many times over as a member of our leadership council, an incredible mentor whose mentee is regularly bragging to the other scholars about how lucky she was to get Laura as her mentor, and someone who has just been an incredible thought partner throughout the last 4 years. And so with that, Laura, let me turn it over to you, and I will momentarily stop sharing my screen so we can all see you.
Wonderful, Seth. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who has joined today. Thank you for our panel. A lot of what we're discussing right now in corporate philanthropy is that this is not a moment. This is a mission. I don't know about all of you, but there are ebbs and flows right now of hopefulness and still feeling like there is so much work to be done. What does long-term recovery, resilience, and equity look like? And what are the investments that it's going to take? And we know it's going to take a massive amount of collaboration, of innovation, and investing, which is why we put this awesome panel together today. I will be your moderator. Please do not fear asking tough questions. This is a tough and complex society that we're living in today. And our 3 panelists are the most innovative and some of the brightest corporate philanthropists out there. I'm going to introduce them, but the first question we have today will let them set the stage for their businesses. And in how I introduce them, I'm going to try to enunciate a few of the interesting components of their work that I think we'll get to glean and learn about as they share their perspectives today. So Chris, if you want to wave to everyone, I don't know if that pinpoints you a little bit, but Chris McGrath, she is a global sustainability and well-being leader who is passionate about growing businesses while having a positive impact on people and the planet. Chris is with Mondelēz, and she's going to talk a little bit more about her work. Matt, how are you? Good morning. It's great to see you. Matt leads Comcast civic engagement, community investment, and government affairs portfolio for the company's greater Chicago region. Matt, you're known for working on very complex multi-party initiatives. We are not in this alone. We are all in this together. And those relationships, the cross-sector, are vital. Good morning, how are you? It's good to see you. We've been exchanging some emails lately. I hope to see you in person soon. But Eric is with BMO Harris Bank. In his role, Eric is responsible for working with the commercial banking team across all of the lines of business to develop the bank's strategy and product capabilities as it expands nationwide. As a leader and ambassador to the bank, Eric also deals with regulatory affairs, community affairs, diversity, and inclusion. So I'm hopeful that all of you can see the breadth, the priority that their businesses have placed in the capabilities and investments in everything from cross-sector collaboration to well-being and inclusion and diversity. So to kick it off, I would like each of the panelists to share and set the table for the conversation. Can you give us each a little bit more of a snapshot on the company that you represent and how you have historically approached corporate responsibility? Chris, do you mind going first?
Sure, I'd be happy to go first. Thanks, Laura. It's great to be here and looking forward to this conversation. So Mondelēz International, in case folks might wonder who is that? We are one of the world's largest snack food companies with brands like Oreo, Cadbury chocolate, Ritz crackers, all of the Nabisco brands in the US you might be familiar with. And then our global headquarters is right here in Chicago. We have a great new office over in Fulton Market that I've never been in because we were scheduled to open like I think the first week of April, and I've been here in my home office ever since. And so I'm looking forward to being back in downtown. So at Mondelēz, our purpose is empowering people to snack right. And we define that by creating the right snack for the right moment, made the right way. And that purpose really runs through everything that we do, and certainly the work in the that I do, which is I work on well-being and mindful snacking, which is about right moment, and importantly, sustainability, which is about making snacks the right way. And we are very focused. We look at what's going on in terms of where our business can make the biggest impact. And it's very much, this work is very much embedded in the business. And we also look at what are the issues and the challenges, what does the world need, and where's the intersection of those two things. So for example, we have a program we can talk a little bit more about, like on Cocoa Life. It's our signature sustainability program. We're one of the world's largest chocolate companies and one of the largest buyers of cocoa. And so we can really drive significant change in transforming that supply chain and helping to, we can talk more about cocoa, but it's grown by millions of smallholder farmers around the world. So we are investing $400 million, or about 8 years into a 10-year program. And we work in 6 different countries around the world, working hand in hand with the farmers. We're at right now 188,000 farmers around the world that we're working with, that we're, and I've been out and met some of these farmers, and, and we have in all the work that we do across our environmental and social impact work, we have KPIs and we measure that impact. And so that we can understand what's working, what's not, and fast adjust, just like we would any of our business programs. And our approach for all of this work is also to embed that in our management's incentives. So in our, it goes all the way from our CEO down to the folks who are running our business units have now sustainability goals, well-being goals in their DE&I goals in their incentives. And we have a lot of board oversight. I spend a lot of time talking actually in 2 weeks with our board about our progress, and they've been very, very engaged. So it's sort of an end-to-end approach for us.
I was going to say it sounds very systemic, very material. You're delving into your supply chain and thinking about it holistically, which is a very business-minded approach. It makes sense for the business and for the farmers and communities you're engaged in.
Thanks.
Matt, can you tell us a little bit more about Comcast and your corporate responsibility programs?
Sure, thanks. And thanks everybody for joining this session. Delighted to be here and part of the Loyola Baumhart Center. It's been fantastic over the last couple of years to see this evolve as a center of gravity for all of us to share ideas and experiences. And we take away a lot from that. So Comcast NBC Universal, you know, it's most probably by the experiences that we have in your home, but globally we're about 150,000 people. And our brands include Xfinity, which is residential TV and internet service. Hopefully many of you are being powered by that today, and it's been a great experience through the pandemic. It was very interesting at the very beginning of that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it's also laid bare a lot of the social inequities that are out there. NBC Universal, which in Chicago also includes the owned and operated station of NBC5, as well as Telemundo, which has made terrific impact in local communities. And then globally, a lot of the Universal entertainment products. So also, you know, much of which is filmed in Chicago, all the Chicago Fire, Med, PD, all of those shows are part of our family and a very important part of what we do. And then the big flagship brand for us in Europe is Sky, which is the newest part of the company, but we have lots of sub brands that you hopefully interact with, from Fandango to lots of cable networks that are part of the company. And so we try to think of ourselves as connecting you with the moments and experiences that matter most. And that doesn't mean just filmed entertainment content. It's what you can do if you have a home broadband connection. It's what you can do if you are interacting with one of our thousands of colleagues across the metro area. And that for us is really where the philanthropic commitment starts. And social responsibility has been part of who we are from day one, because we are so much a part of your lives and we take that responsibility very seriously. Our colleagues will enter your home in certain instances. We are there when you turn on your television. We connect you hopefully with your families and your friends around the world. And during the pandemic, again, all of that has just been laid bare, that there are so many social inequities if you don't have access to that kind of technology. And we've also learned a lot about just simply what it takes to maintain that as well through economic hardship. So for us over the last year, we've really, just like many other organizations, thought not just long and hard about what it is we want to do and represent, but how we surface those ideas. And for us, it starts with our colleagues. They are your friends, they're your neighbors, they go to church with you, their kids are in school. And so through our employee resource groups and other focus efforts in the company, that's where the ideas come from. So we've launched two major initiatives. We'll go into detail on those in kind of the next round of questions. But again, it just starts at that block level with the ideas that come from colleagues about how they feel like they can represent, show up, and be more integrated into community.
Matt, we've seen such a focus on place-based philanthropy in the past year and looking at what those building blocks can accomplish if they're all quilted together for our communities. I'm looking forward to hearing about your initiatives. Eric, could you talk a little bit about BMO Harris and your approach to corporate philanthropy?
Sure. Good morning, Laura, and good morning to everyone that's joining us. Thanks to Seth and the team at Loyola for organizing this panel, and it's a pleasure to be here with the other esteemed panelists. At BMO Harris, our focus around corporate and social responsibility really harkens back to our history. We are approximately 204 years old, having been here in the Chicago community for a very long time. Obviously, as the 8th largest bank across North America, we're focused on economic development and doing that across each of our lines of businesses, whether it's in the retail branch or whether it's through commercial banking, investment banking, or wealth and asset management. Our focus is on providing access to capital and making sure that we can help consumers meet their day-to-day needs, whether that's through buying their first home, saving for college, or thinking about retirement, or if it's supporting a business, whether it's a small business, a middle market sized company, or a Fortune 500 company. We want to make sure that we can provide not only the financial capital, but the intellectual capital that means being your strategic partner. And so our mission here at BMO, and serving our over 12 million clients around the globe, is to boldly grow the good in business and life. And that's how we try to approach corporate and social responsibility through our business practices. We also do that through our efforts in philanthropy and making sure that we can deepen the impact of the work that we do. Our focus on philanthropy has been in a couple of core areas, economic development being at the heart of it. And through that, we focused on areas like housing, education, workforce development, and also really making sure that we can support the not-for-profit sector, just recognizing that the public and private sector has been one of the rich assets of cities like Chicago to keep our cities vibrant and our communities strong. We fundamentally believe that companies are only as strong as the communities that they serve. And so that's why our mission is to boldly grow the good.
That's awesome. And all of these different ingredients to what success and empowerment and pathways look like. This is just a perfect panel of capabilities and perspectives. And you were invited to the panel because you have made some major commitments this past year in particular. So for our audience, I would love for each of you to give a little bit more information on what those commitments are, what they entail. How did your company go through the process of committing significant resources to your initiatives? And how will you sustain that to some extent? Beyond the commitment itself through these other core areas and ways that you're supporting the community. Chris, do you want to start with Mondelēz's?
Sure, be happy to. So for us, our commitments really stem out of our strategy, our holistic strategy, looking at back to linked to our purpose. And we have a set of comprehensive goals in the environmental space, what we're working on in terms of reducing our environmental footprint, tackling climate change. We also have well-being goals in terms of how we're working to help consumer well-being, both in the products that we make and how we're making them healthier, or portion control for calorie management, as well as helping consumers snack more mindfully. It's the behavioral side of eating that is so important. It's not just what you eat, it's how you eat it, to tackle things like obesity. We're working on the community. We just announced last year some new diversity and inclusion commitments to invest $1 billion within our U.S. business unit by 2024 in minority and women-owned businesses, and doubling our representation in management of Blacks by 2024. So that's in addition to a women in leadership goal. So they're very comprehensive. In a couple of weeks, we'll be publishing our Snacking Made Right report. It's something that we publish every year, and we feel like that transparency of having goals, measuring progress, talking about what's working, talking openly about some of the challenges is just part of what's essential. And so that's what we do. In terms of, how are they sustained? As I mentioned, they're embedded in our management's incentives system, and it's very much a core part of this work of our business. And we have active programs from a whole comprehensive environmental cocoa life, for example, and working with our chocolate brands, all the way. We have programs on things like our Harmony wheat, waste reduction, a whole comprehensive set of work on plastics and tackling the plastics challenge and making all of our products recyclable. And so we're making good track towards that. And then diversity and inclusion is a whole nother area and that's something that we're working on around the world. And it's really been personally within the function that I'm in, leading some of that work. And it's really been very interesting, the conversations that we've had in that space around some of the challenges that we all face around inclusion and discrimination. You know, they're defined a little bit differently in different parts of the world, but it's something that's a very unifying theme and something that we as a company are working on together, both within our company as well as out in our local communities. So, so it's core to our business. It's a key part of our you know, our goals. It's a key part of our reporting, and it's a key part of you know, I think again that dialogue with our partners. Because the other thing I would just mention is none of this work, these big challenges that companies are trying to tackle, they're systemic. Many things like poverty and obesity, racism, and they're not something that, you know, any company is going to solve on their own. So we very much are about collaborations. We focus on some key industry groups where we can work with other partners, other companies, suppliers, retailers, etc., NGOs who have great expertise. And we certainly don't believe that we ourselves have all the solutions. So how can we get the best minds working together to get to even better answers is part of our approach.
That's excellent. And I want to come back to some of the framework that you've developed around the accountability and the KPIs, because I think as you embed that, I mean, you're really changing your culture, right?
Right.
Maybe perhaps, you know, I'd love to hear if that was challenging, or how that will roll out, and how that will look in 10, 20, 30 years. But your global approach is truly embracing all of this in a sustaining way. So Matt, you mentioned last year in particular, and you know, as we think about, I call it sometimes moonshot philanthropy, right? Where you're making these large investments. I think the term was around. Mackenzie Scott elevated it last year with the pace and amount of grant making that she did very swiftly. But you alluded a little bit to last year and some unique circumstances that really catapulted your community response. So I don't want to tee you up there, but I gather that might be one of the big commitments that you had to pivot towards and invest and address last year. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, it actually starts with, you know, picking up on some of the insights that Chris was sharing. You know, we are not alone. You know, we're a community, and one of the first recognitions that we needed to make was, what's our role in community? And so at the very beginning of the pandemic, and this isn't just simply a pandemic-driven strategy, but it was that moment of additional awakening where conversations became appropriately uncomfortable, but where perspective needed to lead to reflection. And so we try to think about it really as not how will we sustain things, but how will we evolve? And so we organized ourselves around categories and rolled those out last year. And then inside of each category, it's again about that evolution to meet not just the moment, but hopefully to lead in that moment where you can reflect on the terrific work of a community-based organization, or in some instances, a terrific small business that has already adopted great strategies for employment or other things and putting capital in place. So for us, those categories came down to social justice, employees, media awareness and education, digital equity, and small business. And across all of those ultimately is the recognition that we have a set of assets as a company, and then we have incredible people-driven talent that drive intelligence, who have perspective from individual communities to bring those to bear. So in social justice, the work is very importantly about investment in human capital and community. We've worked very long and hard with organizations like the National Urban League and the NAACP and Asian Americans Advancing Justice. They are already doing exceptional work. So the question we had to ask was, what will help you become more exceptional? And it has to go beyond money. So that then tied in for us to a category like media awareness and education. How do we use our assets as a company? And so that then shows up in a couple of different ways. On the NBC Universal side, it led to the launch of the NBCU Academy. How do we bring more diversity into newsrooms? How do we make sure that those stories are representative of the perspective of community? When it comes to supporting local organizations, that then shows up as social justice is a very broad topic. So we had to localize that. We operate across the globe, but let's use Chicago as the specific example. We brought an organization that I think many of you know, and if you don't, please get involved with them, the West Side Justice Center. We had an amazing conversation where the executive director of the organization talked about social justice as it intersects with the criminal justice system. And the conversation wasn't just simply about the outcomes, it was about the systemic issues that have contributed to the considerable challenges and problems of criminal justice. That became an employee-driven conversation, which then brought us into the employee category. And so hopefully what I'm articulating is that all of this layers, and again, you have to evolve to meet the moment, but it's really important for an organization of our size and for all of us in this community to put some markers on that. So we put dollar values out there. We announced a $100 million commitment to those categories. That number is going to grow, but it was a starting point so that as we evolve in each of the categories, we can rise to meet the moment and deliver additional resources. And then more recently, we also announced a commitment of $1 billion over 10 years to digital equity. And this very much has been not just a pandemic moment. We've worked for years with school districts and others to ensure that connectivity and home broadband is part of what is available to everyone. But we know at the very beginning of the pandemic that was crystallized in so many painful ways. And we had to develop highly local partnerships. One of the best and most successful of those is right here in Chicago. We work with the mayor's office, Kids First Chicago, the Metropolitan Planning Council, and others to launch Chicago Connected. And the goal is to ensure that every single student at Chicago Public Schools has access to the internet. We're one of multiple companies that are part of that effort. But again, it's highly localized and about evolving to meet the challenge of the moment, but putting resources behind it with the dollar amounts so that you've got a marker to measure against.
Excellent. Eric. Well, I'll say Matt, because Matt, I think what you're also pulling together is, again, that local challenge connected to a very broad problem, right? So how do we start to approach this? And I'm curious, with those big commitments, what was some of the response to those numbers, to the commitments? Was the local response relief? Was it, how do I get involved? Tell us a little bit about the response to those commitments.
Sure. So I would categorize it in two ways. The first was relief. Many of our colleagues wanted to know how the company was going to represent itself in challenging times, but also wanted an eye toward the future. And all of it was driven with employee input. We had forums, there were surveys, all the important tools to make sure that these are the values of us as a people and a community, not of a company looking to generate some form of capital market reaction. So that was the sigh of relief. Okay, this is where that degree of sincerity comes from, because it's our voice and it's our perspective. The second reaction then was, how fast can we go? And I think the real answer there is, how can we continue to accelerate? And we figure that out every single day. We are a long way from the kinds of impact, just like every organization here, that you want to have, but you've got to have that North Star. And so staying on that path is the second reaction in terms of how do we continue to use not just dialogue, but action and connecting with external leadership opportunities and internal opportunities for dialogue.
That's excellent. And Eric, as we think about the future, as we think about economic empowerment and access to capital, talk to us a little bit about some of the commitments that one or many that BMO has made this past year.
Sure. So late last year, we announced a new initiative called BMO Empower, which is a $5 billion 5-year commitment to help promote inclusive economic recovery. We did that really as a direct result of what we were seeing with the pandemic. Specifically, we saw the disparate impact of how COVID affected the Black and Brown community. I think Janet Yellen put it best when she said that Blacks were the first to lose their jobs, Black businesses were the first to close their doors. And if we see the early signs of the economic data, it would suggest that Blacks will be the last to return to the workforce. We see that data bearing out in terms of the number of small businesses, for instances, that actually closed. About 20% were forced to close their doors because they couldn't meet the day-to-day challenges that we saw with the restrictions. That number was around 40% for Black and Brown small businesses. And so we also look specifically at the racial wealth gap. And the Brookings Institute, for instance, shows really very alarming data that shows that the average wealth for the typical white family is around $175,000, whereas the average wealth for the typical Black family is only about $17,000. So we know that the data is there to support that there have been structural barriers that have for far too long held back people of color from reaching their opportunities. So our $5 billion commitment was really intended to be very targeted at focusing on small businesses, particularly Black and Latinx and women-owned businesses, to really help them to invest in their businesses and to have access to capital. We also focused a portion of our commitment to community and economic development through neighborhood revitalization and affordable housing, which we think is very important. We also set up a social impact fund to invest in private equity and venture capital firms that are minority and women owned that are then investing back in those types of businesses. We made our very first investment in a new fund called Cast Us, which was launched by Don Thompson and his wife Liz, former CEO from McDonald's. And they are really focusing on making sure that they can close that gap for minority and women businesses that historically have not had the same access to private equity for investing in their businesses. We also focused on how we could use our own supply chain and our purchasing power to build a more robust supplier diversity program. And so we committed to spend up to $400 million annually across North America in support of minority and women-owned businesses, because we really believe that fundamentally, in order for us to get back and to be stronger, we have to make sure that the small businesses are not left on the sidelines. And so we want to be very intentional with how we approach that. We've also tried to think about this in terms of our philanthropic efforts. Last year, we announced a $10 million investment as part of our partnership with United Way to support the mayor's initiative with Invest Southwest to help create jobs and opportunities in communities that have been underinvested in. Later next week, we plan to make another major announcement regarding an investment that we're doing around health equity. So those are the things that we're really trying very hard to do in terms of how we use philanthropy. The last thing that I'll share as well that we've tried to do in terms of being intentional and purpose-driven is to make sure that we're creating zero barriers for opportunities for advancement for minorities, for women, for all that are talented and working here at BMO. So we put in place specific goals and metrics through 2025 to make sure that we're promoting an inclusive work environment and opportunities for advancement here at the bank, because that's very important. So we've tried to approach it by thinking about what we can do to create zero barriers for our clients, for our communities, and for our employees.
That's very comprehensive. And I think that opportunity for others to join you and for you to also walk the talk is very compelling. And it tells that full story. You know, it's very fitting why Liz and Don are being honored today at Baumhart with their fund. But I think she actually shared a quote at a panel we were on a few weeks ago that less than 2% of venture capital is invested in diverse business owners, and it's getting worse. And it's just it's unfathomable almost, you know, which kind of pivots me to our next question around like the challenges here, you know, with launching these initiatives, because to me, some of these are solvable problems. So is the challenge that these are just hard initiatives to roll out, or is the challenge that we're not thinking about it the right way, or we're not allocating our resources of monetary, human capital, social capital networks, the best that we possibly can to solve these somewhat, obvious problems, and it's so unbalanced. So Eric, I might just kind of tee you up for that next challenge question. What are the challenges of launching these types of big programs and big investments? And then I want all of us to kind of think about, like, how can we work together to help solve them and get behind your initiatives? Or
I think it's a really important question. And I'll start by saying that I think that commitment has to start at the top of the organization with your CEO and with your board. And fortunately, we've had that level of commitment from Dave Casper here in the US and Daryl White in Canada, who have said we want to make sure that we're fulfilling our mission to boldly grow the good. I think you also have to think about social impact, just like you do your business. And you have to make sure that you have metrics in place to measure your success. What gets measured gets counted and it gets done. And so you have to approach it with that sort of mindset. And it has to be very strategic. If I'll give an example around our supplier diversity initiative, it wasn't enough for us just to say that we're going to have a 40% increase in our diverse spend. We actually had to develop a strategy for each of our lines of businesses and each of our functional areas to make sure that we could drive toward that goal. We wanted to make sure as part of our procurement efforts that we're not just reaching out to the traditional areas that supplier diversity has often turned to, whether it's facilities management or construction. We want to make sure that we're going to a broader group of professional services and that we're reaching out to the accounting firms and the law firms, the technology firms that have been underrepresented in many ways. If you look, for instance, at the Fortune 500 list today, it's made up of a marquee group of companies like Apple and Amazon and Walt Disney and so forth. But what's really shocking is that you don't see minority and women-owned companies that are part of that pipeline of the Fortune 500. So we want to make sure that we're getting back to seeing Johnson Publishing Companies or Ariel Capital Management and those types of businesses that are coming up. And so that means that we have to be very intentional and purpose-driven around how we approach it. We can't do it alone. It's through partnerships that really make the difference. And I think those types of public and private partnerships are how you really drive toward that effort. And the last thing that I'll share is that this is not sort of an area with the capital commitments that we're competing on. I'm excited to see the same sort of announcements that are coming from our peers at other banks because we know that it will take significant capital investments in order to make the sort of difference that we need to see with the bold transformation that will be required to address issues around the tale of two cities in Chicago or the racial wealth gap that we have in our country to make sure that we're really making a sustained difference.
Excellent. We have a couple questions I'm going to hold in the chat around some of the KPIs because I think they're good, right? Like, how are we going to measure success? How do we look back on your supply chain? How do you help a William Blair develop a supplier diversity program? What are those impacts and what do they look like over time? But Chris, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and how you've overcome them too, because I think when you're talking about these global communities, I mean, these are hugely complex problems and opportunities that you're looking to solve. And when you create these commitments, what have some of the challenges been and how have you overcome them?
Yes, it's good. I would say that now that we've been sort of at this for a while and I've been leading this area since we launched our company in 2012, one of the things that we saw is how do we create solutions that last. And so we pivoted and launched earlier this year a new approach to our philanthropic work and created something called Sustainable Futures. And it's really a shift from grants through our foundation to impact investing and looking for, who around the world, who are those social entrepreneurs that are working on some of these big challenges and are coming up with great ideas, but need seed capital and they need potentially even resources that we have, as we think about how we can also support some of these endeavors with some of our human, the folks in Mondelēz and some of our expertise, skills-based volunteering to supplement it. So we launched Sustainable Futures. It's about investing in local entrepreneurs, and it's aligned to the work that we're trying to do. So we feel like it's not a disconnect from our business. For example, in India, we have a project where we're investing in plastic, plastic flexible film. A lot of times it doesn't get collected because it's very hard to capture. And so we started, we were invested with 2 women entrepreneurs that are working together they created about 150 jobs for waste pickers, mostly women, to give them good jobs, good protection in the work that they're doing, and then taking that plastic waste and turning it into to furniture. So furniture that goes into building materials, which is another women-owned business. And we're piloting this to see, if this can be a model that we then take into expand in India and other parts of the world where there are no collection systems, really. Plastic waste and packaging waste, garbage just goes out into nature, and that's something that we're working on. So it's directly linked to one of our business objectives in our environmental sustainability space with helping. Another quick one is in South Africa. Our foundation had been doing a lot of work, and I like what Eric said, what get measures gets done. We've been very much in our work having those impact KPIs, not just like, okay, we cut the check or we gave the money of X, but what's the work on the impact on the ground and the real change it's driving. And so one of our foundation projects we've just launched through Sustainable Futures, this thing called aquaponics. And it was something that we had been investing in healthy lifestyles through the foundation, and a local group started this aquaponics. It's climate smart food. And they started this venture, and now we're investing in it. They're creating almost 300 jobs, affecting the well-being of 90,000 people in South Africa, and by growing 240 tons of food in this climate smart way. So again, it's a great, creating jobs, creating economy, and these are businesses. And so I guess that's for us part of, the whole reason we got into this space. And I would say, back to your question of what we're working on is sustained change. It's not just the initial investment, but like really trying to figure out what are the challenges, what do we see as, the further ways we have to address. If you address the first, every time I work on one of these challenges, you peel back the first layer, and then there's 3 more it just keeps going. And so we are going with it and finding new ways to, invest smartly.
So integrated, which it gives me a lot of hope too, between the business integration, the leadership commitment, the accountability. We're going to kind of skip the last question because you're answering it and how you have set these goals and how you're sustaining them. But Matt, as I think about digital accessibility in this past year and the challenges, how are you overcoming that? Kids are going back to school, but yet the digital divide is still there. Like, how do you kind of think through overcoming that challenge into the future with your commitment?
Incredibly difficult question. And what we've learned is there are many social issues on top of traditional infrastructure issues. So in broadband, we try to think about it in 2 ways. There's access and there's adoption. Access just simply means that you have the infrastructure. And everybody here in Chicago, you can pop in an alley and you can see how many different providers there are in the city. Most neighborhoods have 3, sometimes 4 different choices. That doesn't mean that the home has the service. There may be affordability issues. There may be technological literacy issues. There may be other things that are going on. And so we've come up with a couple of different measures that we look at, and we've done some extensive research on this working with BCG. In fact, we'll be putting out a report about this next Wednesday in partnership with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. But there are 6 times as many homes in Chicago that have access to services but do not subscribe. And so our partnership with Chicago Public Schools has been about what are the other barriers that are keeping families from having services in the home. And a terrific network of about 35 different community-based organizations has been built to do direct outreach, calls, visits. It's a social work or a casework model to understand what may be happening. And the service is free. And so cost is not the factor. What we have found are all these other social and human elements that have made it difficult. The family perhaps doesn't have a device. That's an easy to solve for thing. But the family may not be comfortable with the child having access to the device if the parent doesn't have digital literacy skills. Well, build training and tools around those sorts of things. And so we have to look at it very holistically, and then for the long term, so that it's not a temporary initiative, that it's a long-term, what can you do when you have the power of this service in your home? And there, I think Chicago Public Schools is underappreciated for their leadership in building a digital curriculum. You know, we've gotten through this place in the pandemic where the conversation was about who can log in. Now the conversation is about what innovations can happen in education to take advantage of these incredible networks, the software that's been developed, and what we've learned about the human experience of remote education. And there's a tremendous amount that's been learned. There are so many problems that are built into this space, but I think we're at the beginning of a very exciting period of education innovation where all of these things can be brought to bear to make a difference, not just for the child, but for the whole family, because this service is available. And I want to maybe kind of come back to a theme that Eric and Chris were hitting on, which I think is really amazing. You know, as you go to build initiatives like this, another aspect of sustainability is also thinking at the appropriate scale. And so we've heard great things about sourcing and supply chain sustainability from Chris and Eric, thinking really deeply about the community level piece. We've also tried to layer in an aspect of that, which is to think at volume. You know, historically, companies like us would make a handful of really big commitments to organizations and see things filter out. What we've attempted to do over the last year is to increase that volume and go to smaller dollars, and not just think about community-based organizations, but think about small businesses, which are pillars in community that create employment opportunity. And so we've had an initiative called Rise, and they're $10,000 grants to small businesses with 50 or fewer employees. There's no strings attached to them in any way. There's no reporting. It's just capital to help them grow. And we're very early in this initiative, but what we've discovered is that businesses, we all know, need capital, but what else can you do if you're a company like us to help them acquire customers? And so we've started to provide in-kind resources in the form of advertising inventory, technology makeovers. We worked with an organization on the northwest side of the city, 2112, to set up a content studio so that if you're a small restaurant, revamping your website to adapt to a delivery-driven future, you need resources to build that website. Doing things like that at scale and volume has become a very important part of what we're trying to do. And then inside of all of that, I think we've heard a great story from everybody, which is these are the sources of future business growth, but these are also our customers now, but they're also businesses that we can do business with to increase that diversity supplier pipeline as well. And that can come from ordering the lunch for the office from a small business versus a national chain. There are so many different ways to tackle it. So I love hearing all the different ways that everybody's gone highly local as well.
Well, this is hugely inspirational. We are so beyond philanthropy and how you all are approaching, again, the human capital, the social capital, the product capital, the network capital, the infrastructure capital. And this is what Baumhart is all about, which is bringing all of that to bear. I'd love to spend the last 10 minutes on questions from our audience today, which have already been formed so thoughtfully in the chat, but I would welcome our attendees who have written their questions. If you'd like to introduce yourself and present a couple of your questions, we'll take this time to hear from you. And how does this land, and what are you thinking about relative to how you can emulate or participate in these initiatives?
Rihanna, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Hi, I'm Bree, Director of Operations for Social Equity Business. And I was just wondering if I could hear even more from Eric on what KPIs has BMO implemented to track progress to social equity and inclusion?
Sure, no, great question, and thank you. A couple of examples that I'll share. One would be around our lending practices. If you look specifically at the recent federal stimulus funding that came through PPP, we noticed that there was sort of a real challenge where certain small businesses, minority and women-owned small businesses, were left on the sidelines and not able to actually get access because they didn't have a banking relationship. We decided to actually extend our outreach to non-clients to make sure that we were giving them access. And in doing that, what we wanted to also track once we provided a loan was how many jobs does that small business actually provide in those local communities, so that we can then track the job creation and the jobs that were retained in those communities. I think one of the things that's very important when we think about KPIs is that we move beyond just thinking about the typical sorts of metrics that we may look at, whether it's return on shareholder equity or your revenue growth, but that we're looking at the intangible benefits of how capital is actually getting to the community and actually reaching those that need it the most. We also took a look at ways that we could provide assistance to homeowners that may be dealing with mortgage foreclosure, and figuring out how we could provide relief. So looking at how many customers were able to retain their home and stay with their families. Those are things that are very important. Another example that I'll share as well, that is a KPI that can't necessarily always be measured, is thinking about how you elevate your voice during this time of polarization. So we've seen the issues that have been going on around the country around voters' rights, and recognizing that it is a very divisive issue. But we also recognize that remaining silent is not something that is in the best interest. And so we tried to make sure that we could craft our message in a way that represented what we fundamentally believe is right about our democratic process, and making sure that everyone has a right to vote and that our elections are free and fair. And so how we engage in that sort of dialogue has a direct KPI in terms of how we look at legislation and issues that are going to be important as we move forward. So those are just a couple of examples of maybe some traditional and non-traditional KPIs that I would share.
We're going to take our next question from Kate Peebler.
Hi, this is Kate Peebler. I'm a marketing communications consultant and a member of the executive committee for the Chicago chapter of the Council on Tall Buildings and the Urban Habitat, CTBUH. I'm curious what the panelists think about government-driven KPIs or metrics for corporate initiatives. I think what each of you has mentioned as your initiatives is amazing and very diverse. And I wonder if the government measurement of your KPIs would be something that would unify your efforts. I'm curious about what you think.
I'm happy to jump in and probably start the conversation. You know, all of us are in businesses in some way, shape, or form that have a degree of regulation to them. And, you know, this is not an answer about market capitalism, but there's an incredible movement happening right now in the investor community around environmental, social, and corporate governance efforts. And we're responsive to that as much as we are to government, which is there are very important metrics that are about how impact shows up, not just in the bottom line of an organization, but in the returns that are provided to both investors and to employees. And so the ESG efforts, which I'd encourage everybody to spend some time on, are a great place to go look at that. But kind of coming back directly to the question of government-led metrics, you know, they are part of all of our lives as regulatory businesses. So a perfect example for us right now, next Wednesday, a really important initiative called the Emergency Broadband Benefit. This is a $3.2 billion subsidy program being rolled out by the FCC. This is an experiment at scale for the first time. It's paying for service for people in their homes. the measures that will be around that are incredibly important. And what's most important in them isn't just simply, are people getting service? It's, we're going to continue to understand where there are barriers, and the role of the FCC in working with industry will be, how do we then tackle the human condition elements of those remaining barriers? And so I love where the Biden administration is on these issues, because they're using capital to drive market change, but market change has to be responsive to the beneficiaries of those programs. And so in that regard, I think great things are happening.
And I would just add quickly that I was going to go exactly there, Matt. I think that, getting through ESG, and there's different disclosures that investors are requiring now that are being not necessarily regulated through like US government, but more through SEC, et cetera, in terms of standard ways of defining how you measure some of these impacts and the kinds of things you should report on, and making it very much holistic and inclusive around income and equity and, and environmental and social and people's well-being. So we're working on all, I think, probably all of our companies. And I think it's a good way to have sort of uniformity, as well as the requirement to not just for companies to have that data audited, so that it's not just, oh, sure, you fill in your report and you report the data that you want, but have, sort of, so that the public, investors, governments can feel assured that companies are really sort of doing what they say they're doing, which I think is a terrific piece as well. I think the movements, though, I mean, governments, I also look at potentially where can governments be partners? Where do we need their support and allyship in different parts of the world in terms of policies, developing programs? How can we help influence that? And here in the US and obviously in other parts of the world. So it's not just, can they regulate us, but how could they, how could we do more? Because I view they're essential to all of the change that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, sitting in on a Securities Exchange Commission conference about regulatory inclusion and diversity disclosures has never felt so good that it does today. So seeing that coordination around disclosure and the call for disclosure is pretty amazing, and I think it'll help us all. And on that note, maybe we can add, end on a little bit of inspiration. There was a question in here, as we heal, right? As our city continues to heal and we think about resilience, what is your inspiration? What is your closing thought that you can leave us all with around hopefulness and what we need to really take this to the next level in each of our capacities?
I think I'm most struck by the fact that as we look back over the last year, this has been a challenging year for so many. But through it all, we've seen how resilient we are as a country, as a city, and we see the human spirit that is coming through. While we've seen a lot of tragedy and we've seen a lot of hardship and we've seen a lot of polarization, I think we have to look beyond that and understand that we will get through this challenge as we've gotten through so many others before, and we'll come through this better and stronger if we work together to accomplish great things.
Matt, do you want to go, or?
I don't know. I mean, Eric, you just, that was amazing. And thank you for putting it that way. I would add just one sentence to it, which is, our culture as a people. I'm optimistic about our culture as a people because of the things that we continue to learn. So, the next time I get to see Eric in person, he's involved in so many organizations. That's his commitment to culture, and it's a commitment to community. And we're seeing that in so many different ways. And I think we're going to accelerate in that kind of work. And so I'm just inspired by people who do this every day, not because it's a vocation, but because it's who they are as people. And we're really seeing that now.
And I would just add, I think that just what we've gone through in the last year on so many different fronts has, on the one hand, as the others have said, has been challenging. But I think what we've all sort of experienced is how quickly we can mobilize and change when you need to. I mean, the fact that we're all here having this conference and we're not, together, it's got its pluses and minuses. But I mean, I think that we've pivoted as a global world and come together and driven change, and so that gives me great hope. I think there's all that we can continue to tackle some of these challenges. I think the other thing that really has come out is how interconnected the challenges are, right? So globally, how interconnected we are, right? And to the well-being of all of it, what happens in one part of the world definitely can affect other parts of the world. So that's one thing. And I think in terms of how all of the issues, inclusion and diversity, why is that so important? Why is the social aspect of how, the well-being of people on multiple dimensions, why is that so critical to healthy businesses, healthy economies? And I think also, at least from everything that I see within our company and in forums like this, just much more openness, like embracing of the challenges and willingness to talk about topics. We had at our company yesterday a virtual management meeting with the top 300 people around the world, and we talked about diversity and inclusion for about an hour, and it was just such an honest conversation. And it was just, and we were talking about, like, we don't have to talk about should we change. We are different, and we are changing just by the fact that we're willing to talk about what's getting in our way and what's the changes that that we need to drive to have a more inclusive company. So I mean, microly and macroly, I'm very hopeful and encouraged.
Well, thank you each for your dynamism, your innovation, your leadership, your differentiation. We aspire to your leadership, to your business goals and objectives. And I want to give you a heartfelt appreciation for all you're doing in our communities and for our society. So Seth, if there are any closing remarks or logistics you'd like to share, please do so. And I don't know how to clap virtually yet, but I do want to just sincerely thank you all for your time and perspective today.
And thank you, Laura, for moderating a great discussion.
Yeah. My pleasure.
And my only remarks are to thank all of you. I think that your moderation, Laura, and your brilliance, panelists, were just, truly profound. And I want to just note that one of the incredible innovations Eric mentioned is Cast Us from Cleveland Avenue. They will be among the honorees at our luncheon plenary, which is taking place at noon, alongside Honeywell and the CEO of Sweetgreen. And so if you want to hear about these innovations in depth, join us at noon and learn more about the incredible innovation happening in Chicago and around the world. Thank you all so much, and we look forward to seeing you momentarily. Get a little Zoom break here between sessions. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks,
Thanks
Eric.
all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Seth.
Bye. Thank you.